Hi everybody, I'm Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a continuation on the topic of healing emotional eating and healing binge eating, food addiction, compulsive eating, overeating, all the junk food addiction, all the terms we want to use, all of that. And I've been anticipating making this video for a while because the stuff I'm going to talk about in this video is inevitably always a part of the conversations that I have with people about the topic of healing food addictions. It's always kind of like kind of a groundwork, sort of fundamental facts sort of information. And so, yeah, so I'm excited to talk about it today. And basically what that theme is going to be about how to actually feel our emotions and connect to ourselves emotionally, which will then greatly impact our impulses with food. So when I have clients or when I talk to people about the topic of binge eating and compulsive eating, a lot of times the series of conversations can be condensed kind of to this. And that is, they say, I struggle with binge eating, I struggle with food addiction. Why is this? What do I do? And I say, me too. I did as well. Let's talk about it. And the first thing I explain to them is that food addiction is driven by the avoidance of emotions. So the reason why we binge eat is because we want to suppress our feelings. And often we created that when we were a lot younger. A lot of times there were things that happened that caused us to shut down emotionally, create an addiction. And then now as adults as well, we create these addictive behaviors in order to avoid our feelings. Now, obviously, food doesn't have to be the addictive behaviors. Many people in our world who use other things to suppress their feelings. But for me, and for maybe for you, the food is the chosen addiction or crutch, whatever you want to call it. And so that's the first piece. That is the cause. Second piece is we go, okay, if that's the cause, what do you do with that? And what you have to do with that is basically the opposite of what the food is doing. So the food is acting to suppress the emotions and to help us avoid the underlying causes and avoid our pain and avoid our anger and avoid our sadness and avoid our fear. And instead, we have to feel that stuff. So we've got to stop avoiding it and we have to feel it. And the reason why that is that the only way that emotions actually leave us permanently is through a way of feeling them. In other words, you get rid of them by going through them. That is the only way. In my experience, you can't think them away, you can't wish them away, you can't meditate them away, you can't do anything other than have the emotional experience of those feelings. And that is how you release those emotions in order to be happier and not have these food addictions. And so really, one of the things that needs to happen in the process of healing food addictions is to start feeling our emotions rather than suppressing them. And what that means, so then what often people say is they're like, well, what does that mean exactly? Like, what does feeling my emotions mean? Like, I'm aware I have them. And that's one of the big distinctions is that many of us, if we're not in total denial of our emotions, many of us might think about our emotions a lot. But thinking about emotions is different than feeling emotions. And feeling emotions is the only way that we actually get through them and release them. And so this video, I just want to talk about the very practicality of feeling emotions, what that actually looks like. And by the way, before I move on, I'll just mention that a lot of this material is from the Divine Truth Teachings. Their website is divinetruth.com. I will link them, and that's where I've learned a lot of these truths and techniques. And okay, so what does it actually look like to feel emotions? Well, you gotta let them be there. You have to let them sit with you. You have to sit with them, and you have to let them be there. And we have to work on our willingness to actually be overwhelmed by those emotions and have the emotions be a very intense experience. I am no expert at this. in like the biggest sense, because I still have a lot of blocks to emotions, but the success that I have had with my own binge eating and like weight loss journey has been that has been true. It's been, I've had to open up to these emotions and feel them. And one of the key things that's really helped me is to learn that to really feel an emotion, the way that it looks is quite similar to how a child feels their emotions. And so, for example, if a child, so let's kind of go through some of the different emotions and how that might look. So if a child is feeling anger, what do they generally do? Well, it's a very physical experience for them, isn't it? They often kick stuff, scream, throw stuff, fall on the floor, flail. It's a very physical and emotional experience for them to release and feel anger. And that's what we're talking about here, is releasing the emotions by feeling it. And so when it comes to angry kinds of emotions, you're going to have to get to the point where you look like a kid when you're feeling the emotions. And that is what I have had to do. I do want to also pause here and say that with anger or with any other emotion that we'll talk about, it needs to be done alone if possible. So the answer is not to take out your anger on other people and dump your other emotions on other people who are in the room or who you believe it's fault or whatever. It needs to be about you doing it by yourself in a way that's not going to damage anybody else. And or yourself, by the way. You have to be very careful. Don't damage yourself physically either. Don't just, so it should be by itself. But when it comes to anger, which I would like to make a whole video on anger, to be honest, because I feel like suppressed anger is one of the biggest causes of compulsive eating. Really, every emotion can cause us to, or suppression of every emotion can cause us to create an addiction. But for me, a lot of the breakthroughs that I've had with bringing my suppressed anger that drove me to want to use food to suppress it, bringing that to the surface has looked like a child who is in a rage. And it still does when I work on when I work on releasing anger that I still have suppressed. That's what I do as well. I would recommend obviously doing it in a way that won't hurt yourself or anyone else or any property. So, be responsible about it. But for me, what that's looked like is things like screaming into pillows. I have lived in places where I've had concrete floors or something, and I've, thrown sneakers at the floor. So you can find ways like punching bags. Some people buy a punching bag. So find ways that you can physically experience your anger in a corporal way that won't damage your physical body or anybody else or property. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. Like I mentioned, there are things you can kick, things you can punch, things you can flail on, things you can throw, things you can, and then there are, situations you can create so that you can scream and you can yell and you can angry cry and you can shriek and have a real good anger release. If you can't easily do it in your home when you're alone, there's ways that you can do it that are not quite as loud in order to disturb other people. And you can also use a car. So I've had times where I can't easily, have a big emotional release because of roommates or other sort of circumstances. And so you can get in a car, drive somewhere remote, have the flip out in the car. If you live anywhere that is somewhat rural, or you can get to a place that's out in nature, you can go in nature and you can feel your anger by throwing rocks and throwing sticks and screaming. And the point being that if you're suppressing anger with food, you have to let the anger out. You have to experience it. But what that's going to look like is similar to a child who is experiencing anger. Now, if you are feeling scared you can also think of how a child feels fear. Now, often when children feel fear, it's also a very physical experience. So there might be different symptoms that come along with it, like shaking or sweating or crying, like, fear crying. I find that crying, you can have angry crying, fear crying, and sad crying. There's lots of different kinds. But, when children are afraid, it's also a very physical, like, that's what they're feeling. They're feeling the emotion and they're in it. And that's what it has to look like for us feeling our fear as well. So we've got to learn to sit with our fear and our anxiety. I feel a little funny talking about that one because that one is like very difficult for me. I still suffer with anxiety, and so that's an area I have to work on more. But the little pieces that I've done experimenting with that, I have found that by letting myself feel more of my fear, it does affect my food choices as well. And then, of course, if any of the emotions that you're suppressing with food are along the pain or like grief, sadness spectrum, then similarly to how a child feels sadness or grief, you're going to be crying. So in order to release sadness and grief, there's got to be cries, sobs, weeps, and it's going to be a very physical experience, very overwhelming experience to really release a lot of our deep pain and sadness. It's not going to be a few tears. It's going to be a lot of tears. And so that's an easy way to kind of check yourself when you go, all right, for me to heal my food addiction, I've got to connect with my emotions. What does that look like? Well, am I having these emotional experiences that are similar to how a child would experience emotions? And if not, there may be some blocks there as to not wanting to, or, reasons why we sort of judge emotions or we judge experiencing them like that. And that could potentially be a topic for a whole other video. But basically, I just wanted to say that to heal food addiction, you got to feel your emotions rather than suppress them. And how to feel your emotions is going to look very similar to how children do. So they're a very good example of unfiltered, authentic expressions of emotion. And if at this point you're thinking, well, I don't ever feel emotional to that extent, like you might be thinking, okay, I've got the food addiction, I've got the binge eating, but I don't feel like sobbing. I don't feel like, flipping out and throwing a bunch of stuff and screaming. One possibility as to why that is happening could be that the food addictions and potentially other coping mechanisms in your life are in place enough and they're being engaged consistently enough that that level of emotion is not arising. So similar for me, for a lot of my years of food addiction, I was totally shut down. Like I remember whenever, one phase of it before I really started opening all this up, I was like, I hadn't cried for like years. I mean, I didn't feel like I wanted to yell at anyone, didn't seem angry, didn't seem sad. I was like, but I had the food addiction. But what I've discovered is that as I've challenged the food addiction and challenged my impulses, then the emotions have come up. So that's maybe what I would suggest if you're thinking, I don't really feel this dramatic about my emotions, but I do have the food addiction, is to consider that maybe it's just not coming up because it's being managed so well. And one of the ways that you can challenge that is by, challenging the food addiction itself. So I talk about how juice cleansing is one of those ways to challenge the food addictions. But you don't have to do a juice cleanse. It can just be things like challenging yourself really to wait till you're hungry, or challenging yourself to have the salad instead of the pizza, or, and I'm not suggesting willpower your way through it, but do it. But the experiment with it is that it can expose the real feelings. Like I said, I didn't think that I felt like that, that intensely emotions underneath my food addiction. For example, for me, until I went on a 60-day juice cleanse, and then I started having utter rages and meltdowns about the fact that I just wanted to eat a cookie. I couldn't eat it. And so, yeah, so it might be worth some experiments to just challenge some of those food addictions and maybe other coping mechanisms you might have in your life and then see what happens. And then you might find that you do feel like crying if you do that, which would be very good and very healthy. So in other videos, I want to talk more about like blocks that we sometimes have to having these emotions, judgments we have to having the emotional experiences. But what I want to do with this video is just encourage you to try it and to start seeing feeling emotions in this way as healing. It's a healing thing. If you can do this in a way that's healthy, safe for yourself, safe for other people, you're not taking it out on other people, you're just being with your own emotions. It is such a healthy thing. It is, I believe, what our souls desperately need in terms of relief. And even though it can be intense, and even though it can cause us to have to face things in our lives that are hard, for me, it's been the only thing that has permanently changed and improved my relationship with food and my impulses to binge eat and to overeat. And so it is a very good thing to feel emotions, a very good thing. And for more information on how to feel emotions, again, the Divine Truth material, I just cannot recommend it enough, because nothing I've ever come across has been as helpful in how to heal your soul and heal your emotions and heal addictions. So please check it out, and I will make more videos on this soon as well about my experience, and find more information at courtneypool.com. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed this. By the way, if you ever have any questions about these videos, feel free to get in touch with me, because I like to take people's requests and I often pay attention to what people really want to know. So you can get in touch with me by my website, or I have a lot of different social media platforms as well. That is fine too. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.